Testing 1, 2, 3. Tell me when to go. The thing maybe has to be centered. You'll send it there, yeah? Okay, good morning. So, last week before Rosh Hashanah spoke about Malchus as a mamutza between Atzilus and Beriyah. Of course, Malchus is the whole inyan of Rosh Hashanah is Tamlichuni Aleichem, like we say throughout the tefillas, the prayers, Melech Yisrael, and essentially the Serisei Tshuva that we're in now are what the Kabbalah and Chassidus calls time of Binyan HaMalchus. So 10 days correspond to the 10 Sfiras from Chachma through Malchus to build up Malchus, because Malchus lesla megama klum, as we discussed. On its own, it has its complete bittul. It has no substance, it has no mitzias. In contrast to all the other spheres, so it has to be built, structured. And the structure comes from the other 10 spheres that are nimshach in Malchus. So each day of the Serisei Tshuva corresponds to one of the spheres within Malchus. There's actually two opinions, the Ramak and the Arizal, whether it goes Mamayla Lamata or Mamata Lamayla, whether it goes from Chachma to Malchus or from Malchus to Chachma. In other words, is Rosh Hashanah like Malchus and the next day is Yesod, and then going Hey Netzach till Chachma, or to begin with Chachma? There's actually, it's not so negate this series of Shiurim, but there's a Eratera from Tzemach Tzedek where he asked the question that either way you're going to have a problem, because to say Rosh Hashanah is the lowest level, and then a Serisei Tshuva is higher than Rosh Hashanah, is a problem. So he has another way of structuring the spheres. Again, it's not Neged Linyanein, we're just mentioning it. But regardless, so one way or another, Yom Kippur, which is the last of the Serisei Tshuva, is either going to be Chachma or Keser within Malchus, Keser Malchus, or Malchus Sheba Malchus, depending on the two opinions. So all this is, when you read it just in Kabbalic Asius, it's just words. But with Chassidus, and I've been explaining in all the Shiurim, that's the whole point of the spheres, and especially in context of Malchus, is these are the instruments that the Eibishter used to create the universe, to create existence. Not that he needed to use it, the Eibishter's Kol Yachal could do whatever he wants, but he wanted to be a Seder, a Mesudadik way. So we have a Sora Maimoris Nivra Elam. The Sora Maimoris are Nishtalshel from the Aseres HaDibros, which are Nishtalshel from the Esses Sfiras. So the Sfiras are the building blocks. And that's exactly what Binyan HaMalchus means, building blocks. So essentially, if we're going to have a relationship with the Eibishter, which is the essence of what means Hachtaras HaMelech, that we have a relationship, a commitment of the Am, Ein Melech B'lei Am, us in this world of Asiyah Gashmis v'Chumnis Dir B'Tachtenim, in order to make a Dir B'Tachtenim, a relationship is not just with Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shamayim, it's also a full relationship that Malchus has Chochmah in it, and Bina in it, and Das, and Chesed, and Gvura Teferes. And indeed, we have these mitzvahs. We have the mitzvah of Limud HaTeirah, which means that we align our Chabad with the Chabad of the Teirah, which is the Chochmas Yisbarach, the Chochmah of God. And we align our Chesed, Mahu Chanun, Afata Chanun. When we do Chesed, we align our Chesed with Eibishter's Chesed. So it's not just with Kabbalah's Malchus, we also do things accordingly. So there's Kabbalah Sel Machas Shamayim, Kabbalah Sel Mitzvahs. Kabbalah Malchusei, V'achkach Kabbalah Gzeresei. So essentially the Esser Sfiras are you can say stepping stones and building a structure of the relationship. To use an example from Lamata here, we can have a relationship, a husband and a wife can have a relationship, and they both respect each other. But a relationship is much more than just respect, it's also interacting. There's a conversation, there's an intelligent conversation, there's emotions. So a full-bodied relationship consists of everything from Chachma through Malchus. Now the specific spheres we discussed a few weeks ago, a few months ago, each sphere, what its role is. But in the context of where we are now in the year, I'm just trying to make it timely toward this time that each day is actually a binyan. Now, I don't know how many of you are Asik in the Kavanas of Aseh Semei Tshuva, or even know what they are, but those that do know, this is what they do. This is their Aved in Aseh Semei Tshuva. It's not just a bunch of days, but each day has its particularly unique focus, whether it's on Chachmah, whether it's on Bina, whether it's on Chesed, on Gvura, and Tiferes. And of course, when it comes Yom Kippur, which is the conclusion, that's officially the full, complete picture, which of course aligns with the time that Moshe Rabbeinu finally prevailed over the Eibishter, Salachti Kidvarecha, and that's why it's such a Yom HaKadosh, Achaz B'Shana, Yechida Sheba Nefesh, that he reached the deepest level of Kesem Malchus, which is the full, complete picture, and was able to receive the Luchas Shniyas. And with that came the power of tshuva, and the power of hope, and the power of forgiveness, and mechila, slicha, and everything, which essentially is the conclusion of Rosh Hashanah. You know, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah are the two bookends, so to speak, of the Aseh Semei Tshuva. So that's putting it a little in context of what we've been speaking about. And I'll add one more point, that this is essentially the bridge between this Binyan HaMalchus, between Atzilus and Biyah. Because Atzilus, of course, is Kulei Elokus, complete godly state, which is not the state we are in. Malchus' role is to bring that godliness into Biyah, which in different words means Hachtaras HaMelech, that the Malchus of Ba'av Atzilus becomes the Melech of Biyah. And who is that Tolian? Who is it dependent on? On the Nivroim of Biyah, of Bri Yitzir Asiyah, specifically us. Sometimes it says Malachim and Neshamas, but obviously Neshamas fulfill it in the fullest sense of the word, because we are so-called nifrodim. Ma'am has to be immus. You can't have a king is not a king over his own family or his own or his children or those that are close to him. So we are the ones that are the most, not that the neshama is a chelik elikam mamish, but it comes into a world where the neshama is in a goof and it doesn't feel connected. So essentially our Aveda is in this world where on our own we may be busy with our own lives. We dedicate our lives to be machtir and basically accept the Eibishter as melech, which in the words of Chassidus is accepting that Malchus is being mamshech Atzilus into our lives. So that's essentially, if using Chassidish Eisis, what is happening in this time of the year. So with that said, I want to continue the series. We're up to, last week I spoke about Malchus as the bridge between the bitl of Malchus that brings Atzilus into Biyah, to Beriyah, and began speaking about Beriyah, and I want to continue that discussion, what exactly is the world of Beriyah. And again, the context that I'm trying to focus on is, number one, what role does it play in the whole picture? Every world has a reason. There's no such thing as just able to create another world. It has a purpose, and without it, something's missing. Both in the understanding how the Eibishter creates, and also missing in our own retracing the steps, how we need these steps to connect to the Eibishter. So in other words, if you took Bri out of the picture, what would be missing? Why can't you jump from Yetzirah to Atzilus, so to speak? Or from Atzilus to Yetzirah, from the top down. And finally, what is Taka the Aveda, Life Kamina and Aveda Sa'adam to each world? Because as we spoke, as Elam Nosim Belibam, all these Elams are within us, Elam Katan Za Adam. So they're not in outer space and they're not out there in the sky. These are all dimensions within us, like we said, Neshama Shenasata B'Teherihi, Ata Barasa. Barasa is Beriyah, then Ata Yitzarta. So we're focusing on Barasa now, which is the second after the level after Atzilus. And I began by just sum up what I said last week was that the Chassidus, it says that Beriyah in the process of creation is like the Chemer Poshet. Like just like you take a piece of clay, before you shape it into details, which is already Yetzirah, first you have just a clump of clay, or a piece of gold, or whatever object it is. And these are examples actually used by the Ramban and by others. When the Eibishter created Bereshis bara Elokim Shemayim v'Haaretz, first he created everything like in a nucleus, what we would call like one cell. Example being, let's say, the conception of a newborn, of a fetus. So in the beginning it's one cell, literally one cell, like one seed. That is like Beriyah, a chemer, belit surah. In that is like sometimes the language used like a keyachiyuli or other expressions used. In this is all is concentrated, everything that will come from the seed. So Beriyah is not just a chemer poshet period, it's just not yet been developed, or it's not been izgala. So Yetzirah will begin to develop in the Tzurah. That means Yetzirah. But Beriyah doesn't mean also that it's completely shapeless. We know Beriyah is a full world with 10 spheres. So it has also, for everything from Keser of Beriyah to Chachma, all the way to Malchus of Beriyah. So the way we understand it, that in the 10 spheres are far more concentrated. Now, this is not like Akudim. In the world of Akudim, it says, Eser Eres Akud B'Klei Echad. So it's 10 energies. There's no 10 Kalim. There's only one Kali. So it's true, sometimes I use the example, sometimes you can give the example that I just said for a seed to Akudim. But L'fiyerech, it's a moshe, you can use it both. Obviously, it's a different way. In Beriyah, you would say it's 10 spheres and 10 Kalim all concentrated. But it is 10 Kalim and it is a structured world. Because Atzilus is already Eser Spheres, with Eser Eris and Eser Kalim. Akudim, like I said, is 10 Eir and 1 Kali. In Toyu, Nikudim, you have 10 Eris and 10 Kalim, but they're not balanced. The Eris Amerubim, the Kalim Amuatim. There's a big tension and causes ultimately the Shviras HaKelim, the shattering, the inconsistency, they're not consistent with each other, aligned with each other. In Atzilus, it's a world of Tikkun, so there's Iskalus, Eira Chochman, Eira Bina, everything is perfect. Beriyah is for sure, it's already a lower level. But still, if you erech in the context of Yesh, Yisavas HaYesh, Beriyah is like a Chemer, without a tzura. This is just answering a question that people ask. How could you say Beriyah is a Chemer without a tzura? Atzilus is already a tzura also. Esesphiris is a tzura. So the answer is, Beriyah, we're talking now inside the Yesh, not inside the Oyer. Oyer, there's already 10 Eiris in Akudim even, but there's only 1 Keli. In Beriyah, you have 10 Keli, but it's still not fully shaped and defined. In other words, if they were to stop the creation at the end of Beriyah, the whole world would exist, like Bereshis bara Elokim Shemayim v'Haaretz, a physical world. I don't know if the word physical is correct with Beriyah, but hypothetically you could have a physical world, but you don't yet have, like Rashi says about what was on the first day of creation, everything was there, but it's like all in one ball, so to speak. I mean, some people even compare it in science, the concept today that they talk about the Big Bang, which is essentially how scientists explain it, that everything was concentrated in one place, and then there was an explosion and everything went flying, and therefore it broke into details, which is a concept that we see all the time. You know, things that are, let's say, concentrated in a small place, and you create an explosion, whether it's a nuclear or other form of energy, and you can explode something and you suddenly realize it has a lot of power to it. I mean, in destructive terms, it's like any weapon is that way, actually. What's a weapon? Well, a bullet is just a small little bullet. It doesn't look even, it looks innocent. But when that bullet hits its mark, it explodes and can kill somebody, God forbid, or create a lot of damage. So in other words, it's concentrated and then something happens to it that makes it come into details. And in a positive sense, it's essentially what we learn in, to use Nigladika terms, klal or prat. So Beriyah would be a klal. Ein b'chlal el masha b'frat, ein b'frat el masha b'chlal. And the klal has all the pratim in it. So the Mishnah has everything the Gemara is going to say, but it's still all b'kitzur, b'loshen k'tzara, and therefore only concentrated. So Beriyah is that concentrated place. Now, what's the purpose of that? As I said, the Eibishter could have easily jumped from Atzilus to Yetzirah, or even from Atzilus to Asiyah. What do you need Beriyah for? Because the fact of the matter is, imagine learning Torah and not having a klal. You go straight from the etzem to the prat. You wouldn't have a certain order. There's a certain beauty And any type of seder, like what I discussed, the difference in Atzilus, Beriyah, Yetzirah, Asiyah, that the structure of things, whether it's from writing a business plan to writing a book, to writing a pilpul, or to producing a film or art or music, the first thing any creator does is creates an outline. Why do you need an outline? Why can't you jump from the rayon, from the idea, straight to all the details? Try it out, you'll see. It's almost impossible to do. So the orderly way, the way Seichel works, is you begin with a klal, and from the klal you start working into pratim. So therefore it makes total sense. Again, I have to qualify. The Eibishter could have created in a way that it would make sense a different way. But the Alter Rebbe already bavorin that the Seichel, the way it is right now, is that's the way the Eibishter wants Seichel. Why he made Seichel 2 + 2 = 4, and that a klal and that pratim have to start from a klal, we'll never understand why. Of course, he could have made it differently, but once he made it this way, it makes total sense. So that's why you'll see in any training that you'll ever receive in communication, in public speaking, in writing, it'll always say, what's your klal? And then break it into pratim. If you don't have that, it's not going to be organized, not by you and not by others. That's why you'll see good writers, good speakers, they'll begin with a nekudah. This is the point, this is the headline. This is the main points. I'm going to make 5 points right now. And even, seeing that Rambam even and others who masader things, anyone who's a masader is going to do that. Because it gives the makabel, the listener or the reader, something to hold on to, and you have an organized structure. Wherever you go, you're going to see this. There's nowhere that this doesn't exist. So Beriyah is like the corridor in a way, a bridge, that is the klal, but it's already not a klal in Ruchni, rather I should say in Eris, it's Beriyah. It's a Beriyah yesh ma'ayin. You have a yesh, but now the yesh is still in a concentrated place. Now, what's the nafkamina in Aveda? I just explained there's more nafkamina in practical, how you create. You go from klal to prat. Or to use the lashon of the Mishnah, there's asara mamoris nivra elam, but if you count, you only find 9 maimoris. From Yehi Oyer to Nasa Adam B'Tzamein, there's only 9 maimoris. So the Mishnah answers, Bereshis nami maimerhu. Bereshis is also a maimer. Bereshis is bara l'kim sh'mayim v'sa'aretz. But it's a maimer that's different than the other maimorim. Like the Mishnah says, that the Eibishter could have created all b'maimer echad. That's the klal. But he wanted the dafke pratim. So the Mishnah says in order to give schar to the tzaddikim, etc. There's maimorim, and I think there's a maimer in maybe Padav Shalom or Anat and other places that Chassidus explains, because the Eibishter wanted a world of pratim. He didn't just want a world of a klal. So what's the nafkamina in Aveda? That's an nafkamina, as I said, in the process of creation. In Aveda, it also gives us an ability. Let's start with an example again. When a Talmud knows what the klal is, so then when he gets into remember, Mamata Lamaila, we begin with the pratim. When you start learning something, you don't know what the klal is yet. Even if you're told what the klal is. But then you start learning prat after prat, and slowly you build up a picture. And as you build a picture, you start realizing this is the klal. So if you didn't have a klal, you'd be missing a piece of how to reconnect to the Seichel HaMashpiyah. So in Aveda, essentially, Beriyah's role is that in our world we have something to connect to that gives us somewhat of the bigger picture of what the Kavanas HaBriyah is. Atzilus is the vision of God, it's Achdus, it's Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'garmu echad, Elokus. But Beriyah, in the world of existence, you have a place where everything is organized in a klal. It's not pratim. So that in Aveda gives us the ability to connect. To use a simple, this is brought in different sikhs. You have the concept I mentioned before, Shema and V'hoyim Shemeya. So it says that Shema is Kabbalah Sel Mach Shemayim, V'achar Kach Kabbalah Sel Mitzvahs. So why do you need a Kabbalah Sel Mach Shemayim if you have Kabbalah Sel Mitzvahs? Or the words it says in Gemara Brachos, why can't you just have Kabbalah Sel Mitzvahs? So the Mechilta says that when the Eden left Mitzrayim, on their way to Matan Torah, so they said to the Eibishter, we want to hear your gzeira. What do you want to get? What do you want from us? What are your mitzvahs, your tzivuyim? And the Eibishter answered, Kabel malchusei v'achar kach kabel gzeireisei. First accept my malchus, like we're talking about Rosh Hashanah, and B'chlal all year round, Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shamayim, And then, kabel gzeres, then I know you'll accept my gzeres. What's the havana of this medrash? They didn't ask neighbors to what want us to do. Why don't you just tell them? I want the mitzvahs. Anecha Hashem Elokecha, v'haftas Hashem Elokecha, seres hadibros, all the mitzvahs. So the answer is very simple. If you don't accept me, you're never really going to accept what I ask you to do. The first thing is accepting the Eibishter as the Eibishter. He's your Eibishter. He's your melech. If you don't have that, it's like someone will ask you, let's say your wife will ask you to go shopping and do things for her. And you may do it, but if you don't accept her as a full respect to her, then b'meila everything you do is going to be somewhat b'diavad, and sometimes you do it, sometimes you're not. So the first thing is accepting the other as someone you fully commit to. That commitment is not protim, it's a klal. It's called Bolos El Malchus Shemaim, like I said, Malchus without the binyan HaMalchus. It's etzem minyan. That here's the Eibishter, you, and you accept the Eibishter as your melech. He is the authority. Then the Eibishter says, then I know that when I ask you to do something, b'meili, since you've accepted me, then b'meili, you'll do it. If it started with the protim, you may do it less, you may do it more. So the klal actually makes, first of all, the commitment a real one. Second of all, it's a commitment to the Eibishter himself, not just to the rotzen protim. Like sometimes you hear the expression, the bittul to the rotzen, the bittul to the bal harotzen. So the rotzen is the actual mitzvahs. That's why Yim Shemaya, Shenamtem levanecha, Heil tetafes beinenecha, Chshavtem al mezuzas, all the mitzvahs. But the klal is not the rotzen proti, whatever tzir that is, but rather the rotzen kloli, the bal harotzen. As a matter of fact, that's what tshuva does. Tshuva is able to go back to the bal harotzen. Because if there was no tshuva, you're aver and aveda, or do not do a mitzvah, so that's it. There's nowhere to go. The Eibishter said do something, you didn't do it. But if you go back to the Bal HaRotzen, he's the one that is the mukher of all the ritzenis, so the Bal HaRotzen could be mechaper. You could do tshuva and start anew, or refresh, or so-called press the restart button, so to speak, and start from the Bal HaRotzen into the Rotzen. Now, on the other hand, just to have the klal without the pratim is also not the kavanah. Kavanah is adira b'tachteinim lashon rabim. And that's why each mitzvah has its own inyan. Each mitzvah pratis is connected, one of the evarim, ramach mitzvah sesa, connected ramach mitzvah ramach evarim, shasal mitzvah slesa, connected shasagidim. Every mitzvah has its role. In Sefer Charedim, the whole Sefer talks about how each mitzvah corresponds to another ever, to another part of the human being. So if you want to have birur ha'elam, you can't just have a klal. You have to have the birur of every prat. But the prat has to be aligned with the klal. So basically, this explains the role of Beriyah and Yetzirah. Beriyah is the klal, chlolos, and Yetzirah is the pratim. So both in the process of creation as well as in Aveda, both are necessary. Like in the example I gave, for example, you write a plan, a business plan, or you write anything. So when you have both, the klal, like they begin with an executive summary, which is a klal. Before you read this 20-page document, there's one page, a half a page, that just summarizes what I'm going to be writing to you. And then you have an outline, like a mafteach, like you see in every sefer, a mafteach. That creates organization. Then you start learning all the pratim. Then you have both milas. You have the details, but you also can always go back to the klal and make sure it's like a reality check to make sure it's all aligned. To use another example, Tanya. Alter Rebbe writes in the Hagdom, in the Sharblat of Tanya, he writes that this sefer is miyusid. Al pasuk ki korav elecha dover me'ed, b'fichol b'vav chalasese, lavayir heitev, eichu korav me'ed, derech harucha k'tzorah b'ezes Hashem izbar. Then you start learning Tanya. Tanya has Nun Gimel Prakim, this first section. And, but it's interesting because once the Alter Rebbe established the klal, the Beriyah, the Yisod, that tells you that every detail in Tanya is coming to explain Korav Elecha Dover Meid. Now, not everyone necessarily learns Tanya that way or teaches Tanya that way. I happen to teach it that way because I see that creates a cohesiveness, connection, because then even whatever Perek you're in, In some way, it connects to Korev Elecha Dover Meid. Now, the Alter doesn't mention Korev Elecha in every Perek, but he leads up to it. Then you see throughout the Prakim, he keeps going back. This is the meaning of the word Korev, and now we have to understand the word Meid, and Elecha, and Lasese, in all the different places. But it creates a thread that even when you can hypothetically get lost in the woods of 53 Prakim, it's pretty intense, the Tanya, you always have the klal to go back to that, in a sense, says to you, this is the klal, never forget that all this is coming to explain, Heitev, Lefayed Heitev, Korev Meid. So the klal, it's also a derech halimud, like, the way they taught us when you learn Mishnah and Gemara. When you learn the Gemara, you're always looking at the Mishnah, because the Gemara is always an explanation of a certain line in the Mishnah. And not that you obviously have to understand the pratim, but when you connect the prat to the klal, the whole thing changes. Your understanding changes. Most mistakes we make is often we get so caught up in pratim and we forget what the klal is. I can't tell you how many times the Rebbe wrote to us, or how many times the Rebbe said in the Fabrengen, he said, "Vergessen in the kude." And in fact, all the questions, people start splitting hairs. Mishpal tahor, the Rebbe's lashon. You're splitting hairs and getting into every detail, and you forget the yisod, the klal. So many mistakes are made in our way of calculating things, and even in communications. If you ever deal in mediation between people who have different opinions, or even chilukei deis, and sometimes worse. So one of the first things you want to do is find the common denominator. Where do they both share an interest? They could be disagreeing about everything. Partners in business, a husband and wife, parents and children, friends. You want to do is find where is their connection, what's the klal that brings them together. Because the pratim, people can get into, once you get into details, everything could become one big chaos. But when you can connect to the klal, when you find, what's your common interest? You both want running a business. You both want to make money? Yeah. Okay, so then the pratim become less significant. But sometimes what happens is, every machlekes is like that a prat overwhelms the klal, and even in your own interest, you get so caught up in some narishkeit or nonsense, even if it's an important prat, but it's still a prat compared to the klal. It's like the whole foundation of the building, like they say. I remember I was once in a place where they were talking, they had a meeting, they were talking about the future of the Jewish people. They thought they were going to find the solutions. Anyway, everybody came up with all kinds of eitzes. I was just sitting there, they asked me to come to the meeting. I didn't say much, but I remember it was in England, actually. And this one said this eitz, and this one that eitz. It came up like Chachmei Chelem. They all had interesting suggestions. Then one guy just got up, and I remember in a very strong British accent, he says, you're all sitting and arguing. It's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. I don't know if you know what that means. The Titanic was a ship that went down. And imagine people the whole ship is about to sink. Thousands of people, Rahman al-Islam, got killed. And people are arguing who's going to sit in Mizrach. Imagine that. Like which chair you're going to sit on. The whole ship is full. So in other words, you could be focusing like you have someone has a pimple on their nose, and God forbid, the whole body is suffering from a yenemach. So you have to know where the prat is and the klal is. Unfortunately, we all can get caught up in details and forget why we're here in the first place. This is one of the first things you want to do in any type of mediation or resolution of disagreements and so on. I'm not saying it's always easy, because people get caught up emotionally. It's not, I'm speaking seichel right now, but when you're emotionally caught up in a detail, you say, no, this detail. I was once dealing with a shalom bayis issue, and I promise you, I kid you not, it came down to that her husband was insensitive because he squeezes the toothpaste from the middle of the tube, and she wants him to squeeze from the bottom of the tube. I don't know if you have these issues. I hope it doesn't create any tension here. You know how you squeeze. And first you have to know how to brush your teeth. But if you do brush your teeth, there's a thing called toothpaste. So you can squeeze from the middle, and you can squeeze from the bottom. And there's some people that do one and not the other. Now, obviously, I understood that their disagreements didn't start with the toothpaste. That was just a teretz. That was just, once something you don't like about somebody, then every detail matters. Stupid things start mattering. But this is a perfect example where pratim, you get lost in the details and you forget what the klal is. The same thing is in dating. People get caught up with certain things. And I'm not saying the prat is not at all important, but you have to weigh it. Everything has context. Anyway, so here's a little practical application of Beriyah and Yetzirah that you can bring into very our daily activities. But going back, going back to the Etzem Inyan. So I wanted to talk about one more thing with Beriyah. There's a letter from the Rebbe, interesting letter from before the Nesius. I think it's in Igros Kedesh Chelik Al, probably Beis, Chelik Beis. It says to whom it is. It's to Rab Leibel Bistritsky. You may have heard of him. All the Bistritskys are children, grandchildren of his. So he writes to the Rebbe, he was obviously a Bocher, and he writes to the Rebbe that he wants to know what is the difference between Elam Atzilus, Elam Achdus, I think he says, and then what Chassidus says, Elam Abriya is Elam Akisei, and does he bring the next word? Yeah, and Elam HaMalachim. I'll explain in a minute. And then he apologizes to the Rebbe. I mean, the Rebbe was the Ramash then. So I think a letter from Tafshin Zayin, maybe. Those years. Excuse me. And he apologizes to the Rebbe that he's asking a klotzkash, not a children, like a childish question. Like in the Cheder, everyone should know the difference in Atzilus and Beriyah. And the interesting response that the Rebbe gives him, the Rebbe says, Halavai, Tegdeli Memenu, forgot exact lashon of the Rebbe, but basically Halavai, the Maskilim, and those that verstehen Chassidus, Kavyachol, would ask these basic questions. No, there's no such thing as a stupid question when it comes to this, because everybody could use an answer. So I always thought that was quite interesting, that the Rebbe saw that if you can't explain something in Poshta Asius, that means you don't really fully understand it, even if you're the biggest maskil in Chassidus. Now, among what the Rebbe does answer, then the Rebbe goes on to explain it with a moshel. So I want to just bring that into the picture here, because it's negay, of course, Atzilus, Beriyah. So the language you'll find often, I mentioned Atzilus, Beriyah, of course, Beriyah means the world of Beriyah. But there's another name for the world of Beriyah. It's called Elam HaKisei. And that's based on the Pasuk in Yecheskel, where it says, Yecheskel saw Dmus Mara Adam, that's Yeshiv, what he said, Al Dmus HaKisei. So he saw an image of a Kisei, which is a throne, and on it was sitting a Dmus, an image of an Adam. This is language in Yecheskel. The Mezritch Magid has a whole tale on this. Some Tzedek explains it, but actually Ayin Beis, there's 550 pages in Ayin Beis that are just on this Magid. A whole piece of Ayin Beis that's like a ganze Chatzi Eagle that begins in Chelik Beis and goes all the way into Chelik Gimel that explains the Teres HaMagid. And briefly he says the following. I should add, before I go to that, I'll just add one more point. Based on that, Elam HaKisei, so there's other names also for Beriyah Tzir Asiyah, which is connected to the Malachim of these. The Malachim of Beriyah is Srofim, are the Srofim, Eim di Mamale. We say Srofim. The Malachim of Yetzirah are the Chayes HaKedesh, and the Malachim of Asiyah are Eifanim. So they're sometimes called Elam HaEifanim, Elam HaSrofim, or Elam HaChayes HaKedesh. These are all also based on the Lashenis and Yecheskel. But Bekitzin, I don't have that much time, I'll just say Bekitzin, I'll explain. The next week is Rof, right? Between Yom Kippur and Sukkot? Huh? The last Seder is on Monday? Okay, or Tuesday. So Elam HaKisei, so the Magid teaches Kisei from the word Mechusa, like Kesel Yom Chagenu. So Kisei means a chair, but Kisei with a hay can also come from the word covering up. So Atzilus is the Adam, you see the Adam Begoli. It's Mara Adam. But you see there's a Adam Ma'elyan. And Kisei is already, it's Mechusa because it comes after the Parsa, which we discussed 2 weeks ago. That Elam HaBeriyah is Elokus that's in the form of Mechusa. And the Kavana is to be Mamshich, the Gili of Elatzilus into Beriyah. So, as I said, I just want to establish that. I'll explain it more in detail in the next year, whenever that will be. And meanwhile, okay, we'll stop here. A good Gebench Diyar. And this probably the lecture will be after Sukkot.